After announcing 6 different release dates, Wonder Woman 1984 is finally about to be released in theaters and on HBO Max. I was lucky enough to be able to see the film yesterday in an awesome theater, so let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. Like most people, I thoroughly enjoyed the first Wonder Woman, and I've been eagerly anticipating the sequel. I woke up yesterday under the assumption I would be watching Wonder Woman 1984 Christmas Day like a whole bunch of you. Then at 2 in the afternoon, fellow YouTuber Eskimo TV tipped me off as to where I could get passes to see the movie that night. So I dropped everything, drove out, snagged some passes, and I was able to see the movie yesterday with my sister. Kawabunga. So with that backstory, let's get started talking about the good. And one of the absolute best things about this film is that it embraces the inherent campiness and comic bookiness of the character. Whether you're talking about the fact that Wonder Woman uses her lasso a whole lot more, or even the basic plot of the film and what kicks everything into motion, it just leans heavily into the deep history of comic books, and it's unashamed about all of it. And that provides the opportunity and cover for some highly stylized action that just wouldn't fit in a more grounded film. Like, no one is going to accuse this movie of being grim, gritty, or realistic. And one of the big reasons the camp works is because of the 80s setting. That decade was a little bit more flamboyant, and so the tone matches the setting really well, and the film really leans into the 80s timeline, but without relying on pop culture references. It just feels like you've gone back in time. Another thing is that it was very reminiscent, has a lot of homages to Richard Donner's Superman, and especially Superman 2. There's some plot points in here that kind of line up nicely with Superman 2, and as a big fan of those two films, I appreciated that. And the change of decades provides great contrast with the first film, which was set during World War I, this dire and bleak time period in Western history. And then you go to this film, the 1980s, where technology and day-to-day quality of life were just skyrocketing. And so you take these two lead characters and put them in very different settings, and you see them react to each of these situations. While the characters are the same and provide that grounded familiarity, the setting is wildly different, so this film does not feel like a rehash of the original at all, while still having those characters that we enjoy. Another cool thing about the contrasting settings is that this movie has this built-in optimism and hopefulness. It's all about noticing all the great things in life despite all the struggles we face and the pain that we feel. Moving along to our characters, all 4 leads are fun and charismatic in their own ways, and the characters are written in a way that even the villains have something relatable about their motivation, and our heroes have their own temptations that kind of take them off the main course. Also, with our 2 heroic leads, there's a lot of neat reversals, so you still get the vibe of the original, but in a very different context, in a different way. So the original film had a fish out of water aspect where you had Diana leaving Themyscira to going out in the real world. Here you have Steve Trevor going from World War I into the 1980s, and you still kind of get that humor. Likewise, in the original film, you had this very naive, optimistic Diana going into World War I, about as dark of a time period as you can find, and she was still hopeful. Here you have her in this decade of plenty and realizing all the things that she's missing. And that's one of the things the movie does well, is having kind of both sides to it and seeing a different angle to these characters. Like with Wonder Woman, she's written to be strong and a person of good character, but she's still tempted by things. She still has character flaws, and the movie finds ways to make her vulnerable. But even our villains didn't fit neatly into villain templates. Like with Cheetah, based off the trailer and where the movie starts, I was nervous they were gonna send the character character down the familiar villain template of Riddler, Syndrome, Killian, Electro, but that's not really how it plays out. They find a different way to give her a path to turn into a villain that I thought worked in the context of the film. Another thing the movie does really well is intersecting the main plot line with the character arcs. When action happens, it reveals something about what's going on inside of the characters, it exposes their flaws and their strengths, and it causes them to make choices, good or bad, that both set in motion the next event in the main plot line as well as their character development. There's just a bunch of sequences in the film that Patty Jenkins handles with a great amount of sophistication in the way that she's able to kind of pull the details together and evoke a big emotion from you. And another big part of that is Hans Zimmer did the score, and it is a big, rousing score that just fills out these sequences. And finally, the film has lofty ambitions. Once it gets going, it does not let up. It's emotional, the stakes are huge, the story is global, and it does all of this without a big CGI invading army, a big CGI boss fight, or a skybeam with garbage circling around a city. It tries something different from what we normally see in ambitious superhero movies. It's so big that I had to sit there and process it for a while just to soak it all in, and a lot of it is great.
You did it! Congratulations!
But unfortunately, some of it not so great.
Bogus.
So let's move on to the bad. And the big thing here is that the film is ambitious to a fault. It's trying so hard to be big and do so much that it can't live up to its own ambitions. It's like a great baseball player who goes into a game claiming that he's gonna hit a home run and set a bunch of records. He swings for the fences and only gets a double. A double is good, but it feels disappointing when it was sold as being something more than that. The movie has the size, the stakes, and the themes of something better than the final product. And the big problem for me is that the movie requires you to just accept way too much. It requires too much suspension of disbelief to pull all the different pieces together. You just have to accept the movie's logic or lack of logic, and it's a big pile of pills to swallow. Hey. And this is true with both the details in sequences as well as the plot as a whole. To give a specific example that you can see in the trailer, the movie has Steve Trevor, a World War I pilot, fly a 1984 jet without knowing anything about 70 years worth of advancements in aviation technology. You just have to accept this and go with it. Now, I understand in and of itself, this is a nitpick, but the little details skirt credibility. It's a story about a woman with a magic lasso from the gods, but you have to have rules and consistent logic with the non-fantastical elements. Otherwise, it just keeps kind of pulling you out of the movie in ways to make you, hey, wait a minute, how does he know how to fly this plane? And it's not just the details, it's also character motivations. Like with Maxwell Lord, without giving any specifics, his character in the first half of the film was pretty clear what he was doing and why he was doing it. But as you move into the second half, as things start to escalate, it stopped being clear why he kept heading down this path, besides the fact that the plot required it to happen.
Not a great plan.
And this troubling movie logic even ties into the third act and ending of the film. It goes so big that the actions have to have consequences for the world, but then you just kind of have to accept that the movie goes on by the time the credits start rolling. And with what happens in this third act, I don't feel that this movie is remotely compatible with the rest of the DCEU. The movie Man of Steel does not feel like it follows years after the events of what happens in this film. And maybe that's the big frustration here, is that in order to achieve its lofty ambitions, it came at the cost of a universe with consistent rules and logic, and that kept pulling me out of the movie and cheapened a lot of the payoff. Finally, at over 2.5 hours, it just felt like a bit too much. There was about an hour section there at the beginning where there was almost no action because it had to set up so many different plot lines, characters, and themes, and it just felt like a movie that went bigger and longer rather than looking for more efficient and effective ways to tell its story and communicate its themes. Real quick, before I try and pull all my praise and all of my criticisms together into a coherent final verdict on this film, be sure to either let me know what you thought about the film or what are you expecting from the film down below in the comments section. Also, if you enjoy my content on DC movies, check out this playlist right up here. I've done a bunch of rankings of the DCEU, the Batman movies, the Superman movies. If you enjoy this content, you can find more right up there once this video is over. I find it difficult to score movies like this because they're trying things that are so big and complex. They set the bar of expectations so high that it's very easy to leave with a sense and feeling of disappointment. And it's very easy to misinterpret that feeling or sense of disappointment and the criticisms of the film's faults as claiming the film is bad. And in the case of this one, it's not. The things the movie does well, it does great. They require a certain amount of sophistication and evoke big emotions. But you can't simply ignore the criticisms and the issues because you respect the ambitions. A lot of the early reactions I've seen from people have praised this as an improvement over the original film.
You know, that's just like your opinion, man.
I would disagree. I think the first film is better overall. But still, this is a fun, ambitious, optimistic film, but it doesn't fly as high as its own ambitions. It's a B overall. It's an 8 out of 10 on the entertainment scale, and the movie is worth watching. If you've enjoyed this review, you can find more like it right over there in that playlist. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.